Pacific Northwest LNG is planning to build one of the world's largest liquefied fracked gas facilities on Lelu Island in Flora Bank, territory of the 9 allied tribes of Lekwungen. There are numerous proposals for LNG terminals in the Prince Rupert region, but the proposed location of the Pacific Northwest LNG project could not be worse. Every spring, over 300 million juvenile salmon swim down the Skeena River and spend weeks at a time in Flora Bank, adjusting from fresh to salt water. Flora Bank is the largest eelgrass bed in British Columbia. This small area is the most important wild salmon habitat in the entire Skeena watershed. Despite the importance of the area, the federal draft environmental assessment report concludes that the project is unlikely to have significant harmful effects on wild salmon. Over 130 respected Canadian and international scientists have reviewed the draft assessment and have determined that it is scientifically flawed in a number of key ways. First, the draft report does not have basic information correct. The importance of Flora Bank has been known to the Lekwungen people for millennia. In the 1970s, federal scientists convinced the government to reject plans for a shipping port on Flora Bank because of unacceptable risk to fish habitat. Recently, leading scientists from Simon Fraser University, the Skeena Fisheries Commission, and the Lekwungen Fisheries Team have determined that Flora Bank is far more important to salmon than previously thought. For example, over 20 times more juvenile salmon are found in Flora Bank than in any other eelgrass area in the estuary. This extensive research was conducted over 4 years throughout the entire area of the Skeena estuary. These researchers used genetics to reveal that salmon found in Flora Bank come from the territories of over 10 First Nations. All of the proposed northern frack gas pipelines would pass through the unceded Indigenous territories of the Skeena watershed and threaten the second largest wild salmon run in Canada. Instead of considering this research, much of it completed by First Nations, the environmental assessment reflects only the limited data provided by the company, collected in a small area over a very short time, resulting in a tremendously limited view of the Flora Bank habitat as it relates to the greater ecosystem that it is a part of. As a consequence of this narrow view, the draft environmental assessment report concludes that marine habitats around Lelu Island are representative of marine ecosystems throughout the north coast of BC. In truth, Flora Bank is not representative of other areas at all. To arrive at this false conclusion, the agency ignored Indigenous knowledge and over 40 years of published science. Second, the draft environmental assessment report also ignores or underestimates the multiple risks of the project to wild salmon and other marine fish. A 2016 study published by geologist Patrick McLaren, contracted by the Lekwungen First Nation, suggests that Flora Bank is an incredibly unique sand deposit left over from the last ice age. This formation is held in place by a delicate balance of opposing waves, tide, and river currents. Pacific Northwest LNG intends to build a Golden Gate-sized bridge over Flora Bank, as well as a trestle and LNG supertanker berth supported by 464 pilings into adjacent Agnew Bank. McLaren's study concluded that the LNG trestle and dock tankers will dissipate the incoming ocean currents and waves that hold Flora Bank stable, with a high chance of causing significant erosion, with the potential loss of the entire Flora Bank salmon habitat. In the draft environmental assessment, McLaren's study was not analyzed, discussed, or discredited. There was no consideration whatsoever of its main prediction, the collapse of Flora Bank. But erosion isn't the only risk of the project. During site preparation and plant construction, which will take over 5 years, a number of processes will impact the area. Clear cutting and blasting will be done to remove rock on Lelu Island, as well as dredging near the materials offloading facility. Additionally, large support structures for the bridge will be placed into bedrock, and 464 pilings will need to be hammered into place by the extremely noisy process of pile driving. The construction of the PRGT fracked gas pipeline will also require dredging, which will disrupt previously contaminated sediments. The LNG terminal will also introduce continual impacts when operational, such as underwater noise pollution from tankers and tugboat engines, as well as noise pollution from the power generation and liquefaction machinery of the plant itself. All of these can interfere with the sensory systems of marine animals. LNG facilities produce a number of harmful air pollutants which create acid rain, such as carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide. The facility will also produce large amounts of light pollution, potentially interfering with juvenile salmon as they prefer to migrate during darkness. Frequent tanker and tugboat traffic near Flora Bank also introduces the possibility of contamination. Even a small amount of pollution could be devastating to juvenile salmon. Many of these disturbances were not adequately addressed in the environmental assessment. The cumulative impacts of this project are almost totally unknown. Due to the multiple risks of the project, in May 2015, the Lekwungen Nation voted unanimously against the Pacific Northwest LNG project, despite a $1.15 billion offer from Petronas. After the BC government ignored this decision, Hereditary Chief Yahan and supporters from surrounding First Nations set up a camp on Lekwungen, or Lelu Island, to protect it and Flora Bank. In January 2016, leaders of the 9 allied tribes of Lekwungen, First Nations leaders from across the Skeena watershed, scientists, politicians, and citizens signed the Lelu Island Declaration, stating that Lelu Island and Flora and Agnew Banks are protected for all time as a refuge for wild salmon and marine resources, and are to be held in trust for all future generations. Now that the environmental assessment is in the hands of the federal government, Catherine McKenna, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, can officially reject this project. If the federal government has any integrity with respect to protecting marine ecosystems, mitigating climate change, and honoring First Nations, they should respect the decisions of the Lekwungen Nation and the thousands standing with them, and terminate the Pacific Northwest LNG project once and for all.
I have 3 grandsons. I can't imagine not having salmon to pass on to them. And that's why we're all out there fighting so hard. And it's not just for us, it's for all of us. And if everybody out there can think of how much they love salmon, and if they can think about not having that and getting it imported into Canada rather than us exporting it, this is what it's all about for all of us. And we're out there, our warriors are out there not just for us, but for everybody who eats salmon, our warriors are out there fighting for.